Our next plenary session is titled Ending Poverty Through a Wellbeing Economy. Our keynote speaker is Olivier de Schutter, and then Brynhildur Davíðsdóttir and Madsen will join in the panel discussions. Please give a warm welcome to the chair of this session, Costongs, Director of EuroHealthNet.
Good morning, everyone. That was just a marvelous conversation between HADEA and Jesper. And in this session, we will build further on their insights. We just heard from them also, and we know that the world is changing quite dramatically. It's the AI transformation, it's matters of trust, climate change, we have war on our borders, and also the cost of living crisis is really there. And all of this impacts much bigger on people that face vulnerabilities. And at EuroHealthNet, we asked ourselves whether these pressures on vulnerable people, whether this had increased social inequalities in health and well-being in Europe. So we looked into the data of the European Social Survey. And indeed, we see that health inequalities in many of the European countries have increased and have worsened. And when we looked into the factors that explains this increase in inequalities, then we saw that feelings of financial hardship, feelings of financial strain is the most important factor. We also noted that people reported more problems with housing compared to 10 years ago. And another issue that we noted that people reported that they ate less vegetables and fruits than 10 years ago. This conference is about redefining success, and I really wonder how success looks like for people facing poverty every day. And I wish I could ask this question to people living with poverty. And I think it's very important to have all groups of people here at our conference, like young people and so on, but maybe for next year, we should see if we can bring in people with lived experience, so we can ask the person themselves. How can we design an economy that is able to lift people out of poverty, even in times of less economic growth? And these are the questions that I'm going to discuss with three fantastic experts, and I would like to invite you to the stage. I have, Olivier de Schutter. He is the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights. And I have here with me Brynhildur Davíðsdóttir. She's Professor of Environment and Natural Resources at the University of Iceland. And, oh, there you are. I was looking for you. We also have Bent Madsen here. He's the CEO of the Danish Federation of Non-Profit Housing and chairman of the MBO Housing Nordic and president of Housing Europe. Olivier, I know that you have been working on a roadmap on eradicating poverty and beyond growth. And I think you are going to present your roadmap even formally next week or soon. And it would be great if you can share with us some of the work that went into it, and maybe already a bit of a sneak preview. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Caroline. Very warm welcome to all to the Wellbeing Economy Forum. My name is Olivier de Schutter. I'm the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, and my role is to provide recommendations to governments as to how to address poverty. But of course, poverty eradication, as defined in SDG number 1, cannot be dissociated from the full range of 17 Sustainable Development Goals, including SDG 12 on responsible production and consumption, SDG 13 on climate action. In other terms, the fight against poverty must be replaced against the requirement not to pass further planetary boundaries. And that is the spirit in which we've been working on this roadmap, which was really to try to respond to this challenge. How can we eradicate poverty without worsening our impacts on the environment, and can we escape the duty to growth as a precondition for combating poverty. The roadmap is one that is not the result of the work of some technocrats working behind closed doors and coming up with a grand scheme. It is the result of a very participatory process, bringing together 400 people from unions, NGOs, academic think tanks, UN agencies, working together to define the key measures that should be taken in a number of areas to combat poverty, reduce inequalities without relying on growth. So it's a very participatory process that led to define this roadmap, which includes short-term, mid-term, long-term measures, and requires that different policy tools be coordinated with one another across different sectorial areas. And one of the hopes we have is that governments in the future will ensure much better intersectorial coordination. The third characteristic, beyond participation and coordination of the roadmap, is that we believe it's very important to escape short-termism and to only take measures that are based on the short-term need to address existing crises. We need to return to long-term planning, in part to ring-fence the resources needed to finance the transition, but in part also to ensure that we invest today for the future and that we do not see social investment just as a cost, but also as something that can have very high returns in the next few years. So the roadmap is there to bridge the short-term measures we need to take today with the long-term vision we want to achieve. Fourthly and finally, the roadmap encourages governments to think about poverty differently. Usually, poverty was addressed by growing the economy and then taxing economic actors and redistributing wealth by financing public services and social protection. And that is what I call the ex-post redistribution or compensatory approach to poverty. And that is what the welfare state is all about. That is what, for many years, we as advocates of human rights, unions, NGOs, have been fighting to do. But that is not enough. We also need to make the economy more inclusive by design, by changing the way the market operates rather than just compensating the losers post hoc. And we need to increase the levels of social investment to break the vicious cycles that perpetuate poverty from one generation to the next, investing in quality education, social housing, indeed, investing in better nutrition, better healthcare, may look costly at first glance, but it is the best investment we can make in the future. And that is the best way to tackle poverty and to reduce our dependency on growth. And I close finally by saying that we will launch this, as you said, Caroline, next week in Geneva. There's an enormous interest for the event. We had to change rooms within the ILO headquarters to accommodate the demand for participation. 2,000 people will be following this online. Why? Because people understand today that growth is failing us. That growth, as we've seen it, is extractive, exploitative, is locking us into dependencies that we now must overcome. And to overcome these path dependencies, to move tracks, we need to think about how to reconcile the fight against poverty with the need for environmental sustainability, how to think of post-growth to combat poverty, and that is what this roadmap is all about. And our hope is that governments will take notice and that when they will design the 2030, 2045 development goals, post-growth approaches can be given greater visibility and gradually change the public policies that governments put in place. Many thanks indeed, and I very much look forward to your participation.
Thanks a lot, Oliver. I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, how will this roadmap land in Brussels, in Europe? Because the biggest narrative in Brussels is about competitiveness. and defense. Yeah. And there are agendas around simplification, which often leads to deregulation. So you presented 5 pillars of the roadmap, and which pillar do you think will have the biggest chance for success? So which is most feasible to get implementation or endorsement in Brussels?
I think I now have 2 microphones, which is fantastic. Yeah. No, I think it's true that the geopolitics of the time are not particularly conducive to reflecting on post-growth approaches. At the same time, I think the new anti-poverty strategy that the EU is going to announce on 6th of May, and we'll hear Katarina Ivankovic in a minute, is really taking into account the fact that the usual way of dealing with poverty is simply not working anymore. We have dealt with poverty in the past by growing the economy, taxing, and then redistributing. And that is less and less sustainable and creates a tension between combating poverty and respecting the planetary boundaries and ensuring that we move to an environmentally safe space. So the European Commission proposes an anti-poverty strategy that really takes seriously the need for making the economy more inclusive by design, redefining how we produce and how we consume. And that is very important because until now, really, let us face it, when we ask governments what they are doing to move towards well-being, they answer, we have a new set of indicators. We are measuring progress according to different metrics than GDP increase. That, however, is not sufficient. Herman Daly, an ecological economist, once famously said, if you're falling from the airplane, you don't need an altimeter, you need a parachute. In other terms, it's not good to measure what you're doing if you don't change things that are not working and that your indicators show are not working. Yeah. And so I'm fairly optimistic that there's now a realization that we need to do things differently, but we have political economy issues. And in particular, how do we finance social policies without growth? We have some answers to this in the roadmap. I'm not sure, Caroline, because you're looking at me, whether I still have time to discuss them. But it's the key question that always comes back, right? How do we finance social protection, public services without growth? 3 sentences to provide a short answer to this very complex question. First, it is important to realize that preventing poverty or ill health is less expensive than to remedy poverty or ill health. So the more we act preventatively, the cheaper it becomes. Secondly, although public revenue mostly today comes from taxing economic activity, so you need the economy to develop and to grow in order to create public revenue, we can tax wealth, we can tax the ills of the economy rather than income from work or corporate profits. And thirdly and finally, investing in social investment, breaking the vicious cycles that perpetuate poverty, is costly in the short term, but can have high rewards in the long term. So this makes it much more fiscally sustainable than we usually think to move beyond growth.
Thanks.
Thank you
for that. Oliver, you already mentioned the European Commission, and indeed they are now working on their first ever anti-poverty strategy. And I've asked Katarina Ivankovic-Knežević, she's the Social Inclusion Director of the European Commission, to explain to us a bit what their plans are. And we have a pre-recorded video of Katarina, and it would be great if you can listen to her now.
Dear ladies, dear gentlemen, I would have liked to be with you at the Wellbeing Economy Forum, where you are discussing the various dimensions of well-being. However, we are in a very busy period in Brussels in finalizing the anti-poverty strategy, which is to be adopted on the 6th of May. The first ever EU anti-poverty strategy will be at the core of the social package, together with the strengthening of the European Child Guarantee and the proposal for a Council recommendation on fighting housing exclusion. All of 3 documents will aim at speeding up the progress towards reaching the 2030 poverty reduction target, and also pave the way for helping to eradicate severe forms of poverty by 2050. We are not starting from scratch, but can build on a comprehensive set of recent EU initiatives such as the Minimum Wage Directive, the Minimum Income Council recommendation, the European Child Guarantee recommendation, and the Commission communication on distributional impact assessment, just to mention a few of them. The EU anti-poverty strategy will build on all of these initiatives and also is going to develop the approach by following elements: combining a supportive and preventive approach. Addressing poverty for us means supporting those who are in poverty today and also preventing others from falling in, for example, the lower middle class. In particular, in the context of worrying rising cost of living. Recognizing that poverty is multidimensional, it is not only about income, but also about access to employment, access to services or food. There are also other barriers to moving out of poverty, like health issues, stigma, and addressing them is a key for breaking the cycle of intergenerational transmission of poverty. Mainstreaming the fight against poverty in policy making is a key element as well. With a view to address the root causes of poverty, the strategy will need to go beyond social inclusion policies and address poverty more systematically by also covering other policy areas like housing, energy, transport, support to urban and rural areas, access to health, long-term care, childcare, access to education and training. Engaging national and local authorities, the strategy will engage member states at national, regional and local levels to step up their fight against poverty and provide them with tools, also with a view to the most effective spending of the EU funding under the present and the next MFF. A participatory approach is important. Combining and combating poverty requires joint efforts, public and private. We need to add philanthropic associations as well. All the levels, national, regional, local, public authorities, social partners, civil society organizations. And also we need to tap into the expertise of those who are experiencing poverty the first hand. As you can see, there are many touch points with the topics you are discussing more in depth at the forum. I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Katarina. That sounds really promising. I like that you highlight a preventative approach, that you also mentioned, Olivier, and the multifaceted complexity of poverty. And she also referred to a recommendation to combat housing exclusion. Many people struggle with housing. They pay too high rents, they get evicted from the houses, can't afford house, energy poverty, overcrowding. And I'm very happy to have with us Bent. Bent, when you think of housing and you work in social housing and with a link to well-being, I mean, what is social housing and non-profit housing? How would that be a solution to many of the problems that people are facing?
Thank you, first of all, for inviting me. Yes, what is social housing? When you're looking at a European perspective, I think we have 22 different systems. So when we're talking about social housing, it's a little bit blurry. But many of the systems, they're very much attached to the public sector, and it's one of the problems. I will go back to that. But when we're looking at housing, the crisis is much bigger than most people think of. Financialization is one of the biggest problems in Europe, and we are looking at the bigger cities in Europe, also a little smaller cities in Europe. People are getting evicted, they can't get hold of a decent home, they can't pay for it, and it's not only what you can call very poor people, it's also the middle class. And that's why the commissioner, the new commissioner for housing, that's why we have a new commissioner for housing, and that's why he has prepared with his team an affordable housing plan, which was launched December. And the thing is, how can we get affordable housing in the European cities? And as I said, we have many different systems, and many of the systems that are closely attached to the state. And when we are looking at the budget restrictions and the debt ratios, they're very high in Europe, too high, more than 60%. So we have to invent systems which are not a burden for the public sector, and which is also a kind of sustainable system. And very few systems, for instance, the one in Denmark, so it has just been a coincidence being a president of Housing Europe and also being a Dane. Actually, the affordable housing plan is promoting the Danish system, and it's financed on, it's a private system, it's financed in the private sector. The main feature is non-profit, and I think it's very important to say non-profit systems, because what we see in financialization is that profits are very high when you invest in housing. And when we are talking housing, it's a little bit, okay, it's a house, it's a building. No, it is a home. It is a hub for welfare. It's a hub for well-being for most people. So you have to have a home. So being a little bit technical, the system, first of all, it's very important to promote non-profit systems here to have affordable rents. And the next thing is sustainable finance. And what is sustainable finance? Sustainable finance is revolving funds. When you have repaid your loans, when you have new production, you have new houses, when you have repaid your loans, you still pay the last installment forever, then you have a saving in the system, an inherent saving in the system. That's the case of the Danish system. That's what's promoted in the affordable housing plan. And what can you use this money for? First of all, you can have affordable rents, but the next thing, which is very important, when we're looking at the welfare state, coming back to you, Olivier, when I look, I'm an economist, when I look at the welfare state, it's very good for the middle class. It's the institutions which are pointing out to individuals to have some remedies. You are out of work, employment benefits, things like that. But what we are doing and are able to do in the Danish system, started 25 years ago, is to have social master plans. Myself, I was very skeptical of these master plans because I had the traditional thinking of the functioning of the welfare state. But it's actually to take the housing area, look at it as area-based welfare policy. And when we have these areas with social housing, it's not the name in the Danish, but let us call it social housing, you also have many young people not doing so well in school. When you're looking at the health profile, luckily enough, in the Danish case, we have on social security number, we know where we have all the diseases of the people, so we can see it very precisely. We have doubled the frequency of somatic diseases, more than that when you take psychiatric diseases, because we, of course, have this social profile. But when you look at it at an area-based view, you can take the pupils very closely. We use the janitors, we pay for social workers, not the public sector, we are doing it with a revolving fund, and take them, so to speak, by the hand, help them in school, just to, and we measure it. We have figures on everything here. We have figures on the grades in school, so we can see it very precisely, what works and what doesn't work. A new thing we did in a housing area here for the last 5 years, we had in a house, very big housing area, many of the pupils, 64% after primary school, that didn't even came through primary school properly. After primary school, only 64% got an education after that. With one person and voluntary people in the area, in 5 years, this figure, it's the same population in the area. This figure has now changed that everybody is passing the primary school, and nearly 96% get an education after primary school. It's a very profound result. And what is also important here is that the investment in doing it is not very high, because when we have the investment in the traditional measures in the welfare state, it's often very costly. But when we do it in an area-based thing, I'm not saying that we are substituting the welfare state with area-based thing, but is another thing which we have the structures in the welfare state, and we have this to have the most vulnerable people be close to them. Also, when we're talking about health, many people, even though healthcare is free in the Danish case, they are not approaching their GP. They're doing it too late. What we're doing here, we're using the janitors, we're using very few social workers, especially when we are looking at men. We're talking about gender before. If we are looking at men and health, it's not very good, never coming to a doctor, especially elderly men. And what we are doing is, okay, they are not eating very well. We have some food clubs there, and when they are at the food club, say, okay, shouldn't we look at your diabetes? Shouldn't we look at the heart? And when we are doing that, while they are doing other things, we actually bring them timely into the health sector and the prevention you are talking about. So we have to invent these new things to actually have a well-functioning welfare state. And finally, when we are looking at elderly people, we all know when we are looking throughout Europe, the fraction of elderly people are growing, the fraction of young people is not very high. First of all, we have to get use of all the young people and to their well-being and for them to participate in the society. It's needed. The next thing is that it will be, think in a traditional way, so many elderly people, it's not possible to tackle that in the health systems. It's not possible to tackle that in the conventional system, which we are thinking in the welfare state. We have to invent new things. And that's actually what we are doing also here, to have to hospitalize elderly people, often with some very simple diseases. You can't cure them, but you can just take care of people, and they can still live in their home, doing this at local clinics, and we are doing that now. So this is a new thinking, and it's a new thinking about not institutions and individuals. It's a new way of thinking the well-being of the young people and the elderly people as human beings from their homes to whatever they are doing in the society.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Bent. Very nice. What I take from you, it's area-based welfare policies and how social housing can be connected to community care, to schools, to well-being. And I think we, in promoting health, we can do much more in cooperating with the housing sector, in attracting funds also, because in housing you can invest and see what services and social care services we can provide to the community. So this is excellent work in Denmark, and so great that you shared your experience with us here. Thanks a lot. We've been talking about poverty and housing, and that all we need to pay for, and ideally we all do this within planetary boundaries, no? And you know, how do you look at this? Because we know that the climate crisis also impacts more heavily on people that are vulnerable because of poor housing, for example. So is there a win-win at all, or how? Yeah, I'm very keen to hear your insights.
Absolutely, thank you so much. We absolutely do need to look for win-win solutions. That is what the well-being economy is all about. There's not one without the other, human or planetary well-being. So it is absolutely fundamental for the well-being economy paradigm that we enable everyone to thrive on a healthy planet, that we simultaneously work on lifting all out of poverty, making sure all can fulfill their basic needs, but not exceed planetary boundaries, like you just said. So the attention needs to be on both priorities. So they're not, I don't see them as competing priorities. We need to work towards both at the same time. And there are three key points I want to make in this context, is to remind us of the realities of the relationship between poverty and environmental degradation, because there are direct relationships between these two. We know that the destabilization of the Earth's systems exceeding planetary boundaries, environment and natural resource degradation, will affect those the most that are the least affluent, even though they are the ones that are the least to blame. Absolutely, and this is simply a fact. This is true both within and between countries.
To take a few examples, those without access to air conditioning or shade will face higher mortalities when we have heat waves. Lower income areas, they have often less developed infrastructure, such as drainage systems, not able to funnel flash floods away, more air pollution in low-income areas, which is a fact worldwide. There is more air pollution in low-income areas. They translate into higher incidence of respiratory illnesses of the inhabitants in these areas. And then in addition to this, we also know that environmental problems, such as the increased intensity and frequency of storms, they slowly erode social resilience and slowly deepen poverty. And this is very clear from, for example, the work of the Red Cross Climate Center. They do very important work on this. Another point that I want to make, and just to remind us, is that we have to realize that the impact of environmental and natural resource degradation has multifaceted implications on poverty and well-being, and we need to address all of them. And you sort of mentioned this sort of in your talk on the framework. We know it can increase energy poverty. It can reduce access to affordable food. It can limit the access to clean water, and will have negative impacts on public health. This is all we know. So environment and natural resource degradation will make it more difficult to alleviate poverty and enable all to fulfill their basic needs. So again, the links are so clear. So with all of this in mind, with those 2 points in mind, is that we have to make sure that our actions reduce poverty in its multiple dimensions. It's not all about material well-being, it's also about subjective well-being. We need to make sure that our built environment supports thriving communities with, for example, access to green areas or the ocean, which is so important for subjective well-being. It's not just about housing, but also all the environment around this. The communities need to have access to clean and affordable energy services. And that's one of the examples, for example, that our president mentioned here that we did here in Iceland. Enabled access to low-cost geothermal energy to heat our homes for everyone, almost. We need to make sure that communities have access to affordable and nutritious food that is grown using methods that are good for the planet. All of those things we can do. And what is so interesting is that we know how to do this. We know what so many of the solutions are. And all of these actions then also contribute to an ecologically sort of just transition. And it's great to know that the framework and the anti-poverty strategies are working on this. So just to summarize, sort of the key points that I want to make here is that to realize the aims of the well-being economy, we have to, it's fundamental to our work, we have to simultaneously address planetary and human well-being, because one cannot be achieved without the other. So I think that sort of is my message.
Thanks. Yes, great. Thank you lots for pointing that out. That's in a common goal. And Olivier already mentioned a bit how we can finance this. And I was wondering of your views. I mean, maybe to stay with you, Brynhildur, what are your views about how to finance this? I mean, all this work on climate and poverty and the winds.
Yeah, of course, we're always working within limited budgets. That's a fact. That's a fact. But a few things I want to make in this context. To me, the question is not, that is if we're working within the well-being economy, the question is not if we can afford it. The question is rather, can we afford not to? Mm-hmm. We have to do it, right? Mm-hmm. The cost of inaction is enormous. Mm-hmm. So we need to move on both fronts at the same time. So that's my take on that. And just to add, just to remind us, is that yes, we are facing maybe lower growth rates, or economic growth rates, but let's remember that the well-being economy questions that we always need to head for, often we can call it unsustainable growth. And there are ways, explained beautifully in the framework actually, that enable us to fund both. Mm-hmm. So we need to look for win-win solutions, and they are out there.
So first Bent and then Oliver. Yeah, Bent.
Yes, when looking at well-being, as I said before, I'm also an economist. Well-being is a very, very good investment. There can be some intertemporal issues we have to overcome, but it is a very good investment. And I think it's very obvious for us from the Nordic countries, when we are looking at the Nordic countries and with a relatively high degree of well-being compared to many other countries, we also have higher levels of GDP. What we are doing now is, can we transform some of these things, some of the social interventions, into social impact investments. It's easier said than done. We have a lot of figures. We should have the best starting point, but we are trying to do it. When we're looking at the housing sector, a paradox is when we are looking at the bigger cities, in all of the cities in Europe, the financialization, how does it come? It comes because we have a lot of money investing in the cities, building very, very expensive homes. Why are they doing it? It's some of our pension schemes, actually. We are saving to it, all of us here. And it's because the capital flows to places where they can see the highest returns. But the highest returns actually is in well-being if we can generate some good instruments. And I think we can do it. And then we can actually combat the financialization and the very skew manners in the financial markets, and have the investments into people and not into often things. And it goes also with the planetary boundaries. When we are investing in people, it's global sustainability for the planet. But when we are investing in, so to speak, things, often it's very not very good investments also for the environment. So this turnaround of the investment view, it's so important.
Thanks for that. It's also, in a way, two things. On the one hand, it's about commercial terms of health also, which are discussed, I think, tomorrow, because in the housing sector, there are huge interests, finance interests. So there are issues I think we need to tackle, but also your case to, in that return on the investment that we can make that for well-being. Is that something, Oliver, that you are working on with your team at the UN, on how to demonstrate, on the one hand, maybe the cost of inaction, and the other hand, the return on the investment?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'll take this second microphone in addition. No, before I answer, Caroline, let me just acknowledge the very important contribution to all these questions of Earth for All, which is an upshoot from the Club of Rome work, and represented here by Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, who is not in the room, but who is really very effective in pushing these messages forward. I think it's extremely important to acknowledge the leading role they've had. On your questions, let me make two remarks. First of all, we can imagine different ways of achieving the ecological transformation, some of which create social injustices, imposing sacrifices on low-income households, and some of which instead can be a tool to reduce poverty and inequalities. And in a report I presented in October 2020 to the UN, I speak of the need of accelerating what I call triple dividend measures, which are measures that in areas such as energy, such as mobility, such as housing, such as agriculture and food, can, number one, reduce our ecological footprint, number two, create jobs, particularly for people who have least qualifications, and thirdly, ensure that goods and services that are essential for a dignified life are affordable for low-income households. And we can have such measures, right, that tick the three boxes and that allow to, at the same time, reduce our environmental impacts and create more social justice. And my second remark is that to reconcile both agendas of social, ecological sustainability and social justice, we need to focus more on reducing inequalities. The growth of inequalities over the past 40 years is not only a poison for democracy and for the trust in governments, it is also making it very difficult to achieve both the ecological transition and social justice at the same time. The reason is that if you have high inequalities, any measure will be resisted by those who have no possibility to pay more, for example, for their electricity bills, or to change cars and so on, and to adapt to the new economy. But secondly, the productive machine of the economy will not go to meeting social needs of people in poverty. The productive machine will go to satisfying the demand expressed by the richest groups of society. And we will build, large mansions and super powerful cars and forget about the mobility needs of people in poverty and about, indeed, social housing. So fighting inequalities is key, and I would say today in our wealthy economies is more important than producing more wealth.
Thanks a lot. Okay, I see the time is up. I would like to give each of you a few words to leave a key takeaway for the audience. Maybe start with you, Bent?
Yes, I think it's no surprise when we are looking at homes, and I say homes, not housing, when we're looking at homes as a fundamental thing for well-being and as a hub for creating well-being. I think it's for many, many years, it has been the most important takeaway from me when doing it, and I can see so profound and big effects on groups which are the poorest groups and which we couldn't reach with the conventional instruments, and we can reach them now. So it's my key message here.
Thanks a lot. Brynhildur?
Yes. So to no surprise, perhaps my key message is that when trying to realize the aims of the well-being economy, we have to realize both well-being of people and the planet, because one cannot be achieved without the other. So that's my message to you.
Thank you, Oliver.
Yeah, just one word, participation. I think what really is striking is that many choices in our society today are not made with the people whom those choices will affect. And that not only means that it is made rather behind closed doors under the pressure of corporate interests. It also means that the decisions that are made are less legitimate and less effective because less well understood by people. And I genuinely believe, having worked on poverty issues since quite a few years now, that if we involve people in poverty more in shaping the policies that affect them, we would save lots of time by committing much fewer mistakes, by addressing their real needs and understanding much better the obstacles that they face. So democratizing not only politics, as we usually do, but also democratizing the economy by involving people in poverty in shaping decisions, I think is absolutely vital.
Fantastic. That's an excellent message. Please join me in thanking these fantastic panelists.